What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Thought Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan, and in this podcast, we interview past and current thought leaders in the space of health, wealth, and relationships in hopes of reaching you past thought leaders, current thought leaders, and most importantly, aspiring thought leaders. People out there, you have a message in your heart, you have a mastery in your mind, you want to get it out there, but it's fucking uncomfortable. Right? We hope to interview these guests, understand their story, understand the uncomfortable parts of it to let you know that one, you're not alone for feeling uncomfort, and hopefully two, give you some motivation to step outside that comfort zone and get uncomfortable. Today's guest is Jenn Cormier. We talk in the realm of health. We talk about grief and loss. So I started this podcast thinking like, hey, if you're going through grief right now or are about to, this is for you. But it is just as important, if not more important, to those out there where you have someone in your life that's in this journey or getting ready to go through this journey of grief and loss. Jenn Cormier is a grief guide who brings 20 years of expertise in somatic healing and the arts to clients who are moving through life transitions and grief. She is committed to the evolution of how we relate to death and our walk with our grief, not as something to get over, but as an opportunity to go on a transformational healing journey. Jenn is the creator of Walk Through Grief with Grace podcast and the Grace Collective, which you're going to hear about in today's podcast, a unique community for those who are ready to step into living, loving, and creating more fully in their lives than ever before. So, like I said, we're going to talk about grief and loss. We're going to talk about her own journey. Jenn's dad was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer back in 2010. And then what Jenn did after his death in 2013. So she invites you today to consider embarking on a new journey as well. I mean, it was a really, really fun podcast. We talked about, how thought leaders are trailblazers, people that think outside the box and encourage other people to come see what's out there. We talked about cancer not being a battle, but being a journey. Giving yourself time, man. Like the big takeaway for today for me was the importance of patience and curiosity. To get outside our comfort zone, like how we should be moving literally through change. The fact that we can't control time, but we can control the actions we take within time. The power of starting to do some of this work right now so you can not only be there for yourself and your loved ones, but your friends that might be going through it as well. And reminding ourselves that it's the little things that sometimes make a huge difference. Amazing podcast. And today's podcast is brought to you by Thought Leader. Over the last 8 years, Thought Leader has made it a mission of helping its coaching and consulting clients get their authentic message out to the world in hopes of reaching their own desired audience through the power of speaking and business building. With over 650 clients landing TEDx talks, hundreds more speaking on virtual and physical stages around the world. Thought Leader has perfected the art of delivering a top-tier message. They also offer programs to build and scale your own high-ticket program and authentically market and sell it to your target audience in order to build a sustainably scaled business. So if you have a message in your heart, if you have a mastery in your mind, you're looking to get it on the big stages, or you're looking to start to systemize what you're doing, create a business from it, create an offer from it. There are links in the description below. You can watch webinars from Taylor. You can jump on a call with some of their strategists to determine what the best option is for you. They have a couple of different programs. Feel free to check it out. And in the meantime, enjoy today's podcast. Appreciate you. Love you. Oh, shit. Like and subscribe, damn it. Over to me and Jenn. All right. Welcome back, thought leaders out there, to another episode 15 of the Thought Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan. Today, we're speaking with Jenn Cormier. We're speaking on the topic of health, really the topic of loss and grief, why you decided to get into it, and also for anyone out there going through it themselves. Talk about uncomfortable. This can be a very uncomfortable part of the journey. So we're going to talk about that today, how you got into it, perspective and decision and why they're so important in the process, and a bunch more. Jenn Cormier, thanks for being on.
Dylan, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
I'm excited about your background. I'm excited about your salt lamps. I'm excited that you got better lighting than me right now. I'm going, we were already talking about before we started recording. Everyone starts, you're like, yeah, everyone starts with the same question, right? The answer is yes. It's what does being a thought leader mean to you? And the reason I ask it is everyone that's listening, like, has a completely different view on that word because it's vague, it's broad, it's subjective. I like to hear from the thought leaders themselves. What does being a thought leader mean to Jenn Cormier?
Yeah, I feel like a thought leader, um, I guess if you consider yourself a thought leader, it's because you're out of the box, right?
Mm,
There's like the standard way that we as a society or culture are thinking or going about living or working. And if you're a thought leader, you're at the fringes, you're at the edges of that. You're thinking about things in a new and visionary kind of way that people might not be on the same page yet. And
mm-hmm.
I guess if you're a thought leader, you have to be outspoken or visible somehow for people to listen and go, "Oh gosh, I think that they're onto something, and I might have a new perspective, after hearing their idea."
First time hearing something like that. I love it because one, thank you for the box society. We're going to be the people that think a little bit outside of it,
Yep.
right? So we're used to things, and it becomes rigid after a while. We need those out of the box thinkers,
Yeah.
and you need to be courageous enough. The other word that I wrote down is like you kind of got to be a trailblazer
Yeah.
to be a thought leader. For someone to be like, "Holy shit, where's she going?" and then
Yep.
want to follow it. Now,
Yep.
you being a thought leader, you're in the realm of health, you're really in the realm of grief, right?
Yeah.
So, uh, warning for anyone going into today's podcast, we're going to talk about grief.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I love how stories start. And this might be a tougher beginning or a tougher origin story, but this is something you're very passionate about now. How did you get into the grief guide world? How did you get into like wanting to dance with and work with grief?
Yeah, I never had an aspiration as a kid, like, "Hey, let me be a grief guide in my in my future life," right?
Yeah.
But it was very personal story. My dad was diagnosed with a stage 4 prostate cancer at age 57. Um, I was living across the country and found out this news the day after Christmas. My parents sat me down at the table and said, "Listen, we've got something to tell you." It was a total came as a total shock because he was a marathon runner, picture of health kind of guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so I I thought I had done lots of anticipatory grief work because he lived for 3 years and we got to spend a lot of time together. Um, I was sort of his wing woman on his healing journey. I helped him have a perspective shift from going like, I'm on this cancer battle, right? Like I'm battling cancer to deciding he was going to go on a healing journey because all
Mm,
the research he was doing as a scientist about cancer, he just got more and more depressed. It was all doom and gloom. He was looking at, PSA numbers for prostate. He couldn't find any numbers as high as his. Like there was no hope when he was researching. Um, so I said, "Dad, why don't you consider yourself instead of having a cancer file, why don't you have a healing file?" And he was like, "I like that."
mm,
And that was a turning point moment for my dad because he decided he's going on a healing journey with cancer,
mm.
right? Which is a very different feel than
Cancer
how
battle.
most of us think, like, I'm gonna battle this cancer, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so I had 3 years with him, and I thought I had, like, done all of this grief work because he was dying,
Mm-hmm.
so that when he died, I was completely unprepared for how, like, the floor just went out from under me. I felt completely heavy and lost, and I didn't have, I'd never had a loss like that before.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any religious, spiritual, family, like, how do I deal? I have no idea how to deal with this.
Yeah.
So that was my origin story to my personal walk with grief.
Yeah.
And the reason why my podcast is called Walk Through Grief with Grace and my website, Walk Through Grief with Grace, is because one of my mentors, Dr. Louis Malmadrona, I asked him, I said, I don't know what to do,
Mm,
and he said, here's what you can do. You can take grief by the hand and you can walk with it all year long through every season, every holiday, every milestone, every birthday, and you're going to let it teach you. And we'll hold space for you at the end of the year and have a soul releasing ceremony. And when he said I had all year, there was something so comforting in that because everything else was so rushed, right? We had a memorial service, had 11 days to figure out flowers and, all the things you have to do,
yeah.
when somebody dies. So the fact I had all year was very comforting to me. And I didn't know what, taking grief by the hand meant. I didn't know what, I don't know what that meant, but I didn't want to do my quote unquote spiritual practice, right? I was a yogi, I was a dancer, I, had this meditation practice, and I did not feel like meditating. I did
Mm-hmm.
not feel like, so I would set a timer, just like like a meditation practice for 15. I'm like, I can handle 15 minutes. And I would just say, okay, grief, what do you have to teach me today?
Mm-hmm.
And I would, some days I would wail and roll on the floor and be loud. And some days I'd listen to my dad's favorite music and cry to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, It's like,
Mm-hmm.
but it turned into a little daily ritual where I lit a candle and I walked in a circle and there were certain things I did and it turned into a little bit of a dance piece, a ritual piece. Um, so that was very healing for me to take that time.
It's incredible hearing how it hit you after he actually passed physically, right?
Yeah.
And then how you got to work with it because like your mentor told you, it's like, hey, we got time here. We have a full year.
Yeah.
And then you start doing rituals. It almost sounds like you're dealing with grief as a journey, very
Yeah.
similar to your dad dealing with cancer as a
Exactly.
journey, rather than
Exactly.
like, let's get to the end. Let's get to the end.
Exactly.
Because I feel like a lot of people will like, what would you say to the person out there? I imagine as soon as you lose someone very close to you. I grew up with my grandparents, right?
Mhm.
So when I lost my grandma, it hit me pretty hard, just as it was the woman that raised me.
Yeah.
And it's this feeling, or it's like we say to ourselves, "I'm never gonna be me again. I'm never gonna feel the same again."
Yeah.
Like you don't understand,
Yeah.
right? As someone that went through it, and you're walking on your own journey, what do you say to someone like that? This might still be in the freshness of it all.
Yeah, and that it is a journey.
Hmm.
So, I like to see grief as a journey, just like healing is a journey,
Hmm.
right? And my dad used to say, "It's not about the destination, it's about the journey." And I think that that's the misconception when we're in pain, right? We wanna be done with the pain. We want it to be over,
Hmm.
right? If we're suffering after a loss and it is painful, we want it to be done.
Hmm.
And that's the whole we have, 2 weeks bereavement time. We have, we should be over it in 6 weeks or this much time. But my understanding now, it's been over 11 years since my dad died. And now my understanding is, oh, grief is it's all the emotions. It's not just deep, dark sadness and desperation and anger. It's also gratitude. It's also humor. It's also, pleasure. There's all these things that come, everything is woven into the grief journey. And now I understand that, there's grief and there's celebration and there's, everything is a cycle, right?
Hmm.
We're losing things are dying all the time. Phases of our life are dying, things are starting anew. So that it's just this constant cycle of letting go and celebrating and starting again. So now I see that there's grief every day. There's grief, I watch I just started watching This Is Us,
Hmm.
on Netflix. I'm like, I love it. It's like a grief practice. I'll watch that show and cry.
Hmm.
It's like it's healthy to be grieving a little bit and celebrating a little bit regularly, right? Not just when someone dies.
So if someone were to ask, they hear all of that, which
Yeah,
is beautiful,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
life is a journey, life's a cycle. Like,
yeah,
but if they're to be like, yeah, how long is the grief journey? Like they
yeah.
still, what would your response be to that?
I would say worry less about the timeline,
Mm-hmm.
more about what you're doing in that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't control time,
Mm-hmm.
but we can control our actions within that timeline, right? So it was really comforting for me to hear a year because I had more time. Some people need years. Some people need, it's not like it's going to be a very unique journey for every person. It's like a worldwide, what I'm thinking about is, there's people that travel all the way around the world or
Mm-hmm.
cross the Atlantic Ocean or something in a little boat. It's
Yeah.
like, how long is it going to take? Like, well, is there going to be wind? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I
I'm
mean? So,
not doing it for that. I'm doing it for what I learn in the process.
yeah.
So once you become like once you surrender to that early of like,
Mhm.
hey, this because you're telling us like, hey, it's 11 years and you'll still find areas where this is popping up. You could still say in the grief journey.
Yeah.
It seems like it's going to have different seasons. I love that you said I wrote down you can't control time, but you can control your actions within
Yes.
that time.
Yes.
Um, I love that. Now you call your podcast and what you do, you call it a walk through grief with grace. Very cool.
Mhm. Mhm.
Why? What made you fall on that name?
Well, at the beginning, after my dad died, he got a rescue dog named Daisy, who is
Mm,
half yellow lab, half greyhound, and she needed to run. So he would take her to the dog park, and I would often go with him. There's a big field. There were a couple different places we would go, and there was, a nice long trail walk in the woods.
mm-hmm,
Um, and we would walk together. And there's something healing about simply walking in nature, you know? Um, and at the beginning, that's all I could do was just get outside and walk.
mm-hmm.
Um, so, and that's, it's also kind of a metaphor, right? We're just kind of walking through
Yeah,
whatever
I
we're
thought
going
it
to
was more along the lines of the journey, but you're
do.
actually saying too, it's like getting out, moving your
Yeah.
body. Why is that so important?
Yeah, my background is in somatic healing arts, right?
Mm,
Through the body. Pilates therapeutics, yoga therapeutics, that kind of thing. And what happens, we're multi-layered beings, right? We have
mm-hmm,
our mental layer, our emotional layer, our physical layer, our breath layer, there are all these layers of self. And what's important is that we don't dam up the energy in any of those layers. So the natural state of the universe, right, is movement. There's movement happening all the time, right? In light, vibration, sound, right? Everything is movement. And where we get sick and where we suffer is where we dam up that movement,
mm-hmm,
right? To put it simply. So, if anyone who's listening has ever gotten acupuncture, for example, right? So all the different traditions in Thai massage, they're called sen lines or acupuncture lines. There's blood flows through the veins and arteries. We've got a whole nervous system, right? We
mm-hmm.
have energetic lines that run along with that nervous system. So when we simply put, we get sick when something's blocked,
Yeah.
right? So we need to continually be in movement. I've got a shoulder, injury right now, and it's like I need to keep gently moving. I need to keep walking. I need to get body work, you know.
Mm.
So that is it's healing when we move.
Especially, it's like I feel like now with society post COVID, a lot of people working from home, like it's so much easier to have a sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah.
Sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah.
I'm talking the rocks.
Also
Sedentary.
sediment.
Also, yeah, where we just kind of like don't do much. We stay in our house. So it's
Yeah.
if someone comes to you, right, with the people that you work with, and they're like, it's been 10 years and I can't seem to break this. I'm damned up. Like, what's one of the first things you tell them?
Yeah, well, I would wonder, my wondering is, are they getting outside in nature or
Hmm,
not?
hmm,
What kind of community do they have?
hmm,
What supports do they have?
hmm,
Do they have mentorship, therapists, community groups, right? Family? How are they connected? So, the question of some people say, well, I really need to do this alone. I need to go on this journey alone. I often there's a stigma for men also. I've taught so many free workshops and master classes and 5-day events and things. Very few men will show up for
Mm.
grief events I hold. So, it's interesting. I feel like, and when I've talked to certain, especially for men in our society, they feel like they just gotta figure it out. They gotta go it
Mm-hmm.
alone. They gotta do it on their own. There's something about that. And what I've noticed for me is, yeah, sometimes you need to be alone. Sometimes we need solitude. That is not good or bad. Um, but my recommendation is the more solitude you can take in nature, the better. See if you can, yeah, we need some Netflix under the covers every once in a while. We need to be in our bed sometimes. We need naps, all of
Mm-hmm.
that. But can you take your alone time by a stream, by the ocean, in a forest, right? And then that is so healing to do that
Mm-hmm.
under the sun, in the breeze, right? By some water. So that would be my curiosity for the person that's been suffering for years and years. Have they been connecting, you know, with
And you're
nature, with themselves, with community? Like that's essential.
because you're saying connecting doesn't even have to be with someone. It can be like just connecting with yourself in and with nature.
Yeah.
What do you think what do you think stops that for a lot of, we'll say, men or women, where it's, hey, I'd rather be at Netflix is great, but that can also turn into 3 days binge in the office and
Right.
not like getting it, or having to be on the phone, because it's almost like this resistance we have towards like, oh, a stream and I can't be on my phone. Like, what do you think stops us from wanting to do that specifically when we're in grief?
Um, Sometimes it's just because it's something different. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know? If you
Mm-hmm.
didn't already have a practice of walking down the street to the field,
Hmm.
it's when you're grieving, everything is harder. So to do something new when you're grieving is really hard,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think some of it might just be it's a challenge to get out of our comfort zone no matter what, and then we add that layer of I'm grieving and now you're asking me to do something new. Like that's a lot. So sometimes we need the support of a friend, and I'll just public service announcement for those of you listening who are like, gosh, I'm not grieving right now, but I have a friend or a colleague and they just lost somebody really important and I don't really know what to say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know what to do. Well, it's more about being there for them, not exactly what you say, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
no magical thing that you could possibly say that's going to make it better. But if you can show up, and if you can show up and offer, just like a kid, right? When you talk to toddlers, right? You
Mm-hmm.
give them two simple choices like, would you rather have
Yeah.
this or that? Right? Would you rather play with Legos or go outside? Right? It's just two very, so supporting someone and saying, hey, I'm free after work at 5. Would you rather me bring you by some soup and leave it at your step? Or would you like to go for a walk with me around the block?
Mm.
Right? Would you like me to come in and sit with you, or would you like to go? So that's really helpful because also when you're grieving, it's hard to think about what you need. I remember people say, "Oh, Jen, anything you need, I'm here. I'll support you, whatever you need." And I would
Mm.
think, I don't know what I need. Are you going to buy me a house in Maui or something? I don't know, like
Yeah.
what I need. But if you offer something really specific, right?
Yeah.
And say, "I'm making soup. I can drop it by your house after work. Would you like me to come in and eat it with you? Or would you like me to just leave it there?" Then it's so simple. Then you can say, "Oh, come in." Or,
Yeah.
"Oh, just leave it," right?
It's like
Simple.
you're limiting their decision fatigue,
Yeah,
right? You're like, hey, let me take that off your plate. You don't need that right
yeah,
now. Let's just
exactly.
go do something. Like you said, you might not say the perfect thing, but just the act of getting out. I remember over the weekend we all got together as friends, and two things that came from it was one buddy wasn't going to come out, and I
Mhm.
kind of like leaned in. I'm like, come on, you'll enjoy it.
Yeah,
And you always get that thank you after, right? I think
yeah,
sometimes we're resistant to trying something new, or like you said, just even going a walk near a stream. If it's new, it's uncomfortable, I'm not going to do it.
yeah,
We love it after the fact.
yeah,
And then the second thing, sometimes I think the hardest part of doing something new is the thought process leading up to it. And
yeah,
then you're there and you're like, no, I actually really fucking like this.
yeah.
Um, you also said too, because you're not perfect, right? Yeah, yes, you're dancing, you're flowing through this journey, but you speak of other people going through hard times,
Mhm.
right? And if you don't mind me challenging a bit, I'm sure you had, like, what was your hard times? What was your dams where you found yourself blocked along this journey through grief?
Yeah, I think I've had several different blocks. I think at the beginning, I couldn't even get out for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to be on the couch. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even get outside. What got me outside was, our rescue dog, Daisy, was staying with my uncle, Dave,
Mm-hmm.
and when she came back, it was like she had to get outside, so I went and took her. But I wasn't doing it on my own. I needed that external motivation,
Mm-hmm.
to get me outside, and I was not wanting to dance, or, there was a mentor said, "You can dance, you can drum, you can sing." And I was like, "I don't feel like singing, I don't feel like drumming, I don't feel like dancing."
Mm-hmm.
So, I've had I don't know, gosh, I feel like I've had every kind of block you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. Do you, looking back on it, because I'm sure there's going to be some people here that are friends of
Mhm.
someone going through it. There's going to be some people here that are going through it themselves and
Yeah,
have a network.
yeah,
There's going to be some people listening to this that are going through this and they don't have that big of a network.
yeah.
Like, for you going through this, because I want to kind of talk about you and the uncomfort journey. You have 20 years of somatic healing and you've helped other people and you have a podcast now. And I think a lot of times when people hear the Thought Leader podcast, they're like, oh, she's made it. I can't be her. Right? Like, where did you find yourself in? Were you someone that you're like, hey, I win it alone and this is what I had to do to get through? Did you tap into your network? Like, you had to make that? Or did you have people reach out to you? Like, what really helped you?
Yeah, there were moments, I feel like, I don't know where that quote comes from, like, life is not made of years, it's made of moments.
Mm-hmm.
We have those moments that we remember, and the most powerful memories of me receiving healing or comfort, and I'm just talking specifically after my dad died. I've had lots of other losses
Mm-hmm.
and lots of other challenges, but, um, were 2 moments I'm remembering. One was when my grandmother and my aunt and my mom and my cousin all came over and we took a nap in my mom's bed. So it's
Mm-hmm.
this little, queen size bed, and there were 5 of us, like, just snuggled up, and there was something about that physical comfort of having my family that close
Mm-hmm.
for, a couple of hours, and that was so powerful. That was a moment that I'm remembering, and
Mm-hmm.
then another moment was, we were upstairs in my healing space, and there were a whole bunch of women that just came up and surrounded me, and we just started singing songs. And someone just started a song, and we sang this song and that song, but neither one of those were things that I had to, initiate. There were people that came to me. I also remember a friend coming over, and I knew she was in the middle. I think she was a professor at the time and in the middle of finals, and, no, she had no time, but she showed
Mm-hmm.
up anyway. And I remember her just sitting down on the couch with me and putting her hand on my leg and just saying, "I'm here." And that was it. And we sat in silence. So those are 3 moments that really stick with me and were very healing.
One, I appreciate you sharing that. I just got emotional towards the end there. Two things come up there. One of just, it is the simple things. Like, when we look back and it's like, it's not these grand acts of, like, grand gestures to be like, oh, what about I'm taking you to Florida, right?
Yeah,
It's the really simple things that make the lasting difference, right?
yeah.
And two, it's, man, I started this podcast being like, what is it that Jenn has, like, trying to think of our audience of someone going through grief right now?
Mhm.
And, like, what could you teach them? And of course a bunch has already come from that, but it really seems like the light is also, it's surprising to me, is like, if you're listening to this and you know someone close in your life is going through the grieving process or the grieving journey, how crucial of a role you can play
Yeah,
in their journey and their healing, right? It's just as much for that person as it is for the person going through it.
yeah.
um Not a total shift with it, but you had 3 years of a buildup, right? Like, with your dad going through this and then kind of re-going through it.
Mhm.
From that, or the people that you've worked with, 2 decades in the in the field now. Is there anything people can start to do now? Let's say like my grandfather, love him, last remaining grandfather. He's getting towards the end of his life. He's a
Yeah.
jokester. He's got his wit and everything. He lost a leg, I think, due to diabetes, and he'll tell you I'm on my last leg. But he is quite literally on his last leg, right?
Yeah.
What are things that people can do to kind of get ready for like the pregame before the grieving process?
Yeah. I think first of all, those moments that I shared, right? That friend that just came and sat with me, she had to do some personal spiritual work to be comfortable enough with herself
Hmm.
to be able to sit in discomfort with me, right?
Hmm.
So we need to do our own, whatever that looks like for us, spiritual work,
Hmm.
right? Whatever path that is, right? We have meditators, we have, whatever path that is, to be comfortable with yourself. Then you can hold space and be present with someone going through whatever they're going through without having to fix it, without having to, take it on. Because I think that that's something that happens, right? We feel like, oh, we have to carry that burden for somebody we love,
Hmm.
or, we go right in, what can I do? How can I fix this?
Hmm.
Right? There's nothing to fix. You can't fix it.
Hmm.
Right. So getting comfortable with not being able to fix things in our own lives, and then we can step into someone else's life when they're suffering and go, yeah, I know I can't fix this for them either, but I can be present. So that's a skill that we cultivate on the day to day. Number one. And then number two, we need to get comfortable. For those of us who are parents out there, I have a 9-year-old. We need to get comfortable um, letting our kids be in life, like the full spectrum of life. I was just saying this to a friend, that I've had a habit of bringing him everywhere with me. Um, and that was out of necessity a lot of the time. But, you know, the mainstream thing to do is get a babysitter, right? You get a
Hmm.
babysitter, you leave your kids home when you're going to do the adult things, right? We want to protect our children um, from discomfort or from death. It's not doing them any favors,
Yeah.
right? So go sit with somebody that's dying, and you can bring your kid, right? Because if we can, I'm just, that was not something I was planning to say, but I
Hmm.
think it's really important. I had, when my son was 5, I had this long discussion with him over the dinner table about death and dying and burials. And, I went through a death doula training,
Hmm.
about conscious dying, green burial, home funeral, funeral rites, legal rights. So I chatted with him at length, and he, had no discomfort in it whatsoever. We talked about, burial, cremation, sky burial. He was like, "Yeah, I want a sky burial, mom." And I was like, "Well, it's not legal in the United States. If you die in Tibet, we could do a sky burial. But if it's," he's like, "Yeah, if it's legal." I said, "Okay, so if I'm still alive when you die and it's legal, you want a sky burial? Absolutely. If not, I want to get buried. I want to get buried with my stuffed animals on me." And pieces of paper. And I was like, okay, what would the paper say? He said, maybe thoughts and prayers from people. This is all he was just coming up with, what he would want when he dies.
I love this, but it reminds me a lot of what I'll do with my work with young kids to help them tap into their imagination. And it's like you'd be shocked if you give a kid that space to step into what they can come up with. And it's
Yeah,
almost like hearing from it, it's like it's not uncomfortable for them,
it's
right?
not.
It's uncomfortable for us, and it's like if we kind of put that like woo as it sounds is like, but if we're bringing that energy around them, they'll naturally be like, okay, I guess this is uncomfortable and we don't talk about it.
Right.
Whereas if you're putting in your work, even you can't fix your friend and you go hang with your friend, but the space that you have around you, the energy work that you've done for yourself is grounded, you become a pillar for that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think this has been fascinating. If you see me looking down, like I think I told you before, I promise I'm not ignoring you. I'm just taking a shit ton of notes.
Yeah.
I want to lead to the last big questions that I ask,
Mhm.
right? Which is
Sure.
this can feel uncomfortable. As much as what we're saying goes to the other side, it can still feel uncomfortable. People could hear this and say, yeah, cool, cool, cool. It just feels like for you, why is it so important for you to get outside your comfort zone or specifically to talk about things like this that that society in the box would deem uncomfortable?
Well, it's become comfortable for me because I had a curiosity.
Hmm.
I think that we should follow our curiosity. I don't like to say the word should a lot, but we could follow our curiosity. And sometimes when we're curious, it's about something that's exciting, or sometimes it's a little scary. Um, but curiosity is there to open a door. And when we're talking death and dying and grief, maybe there's been this really uncomfortable lens around it in our family or community or something. But if there's a curiosity there, we can stretch a little bit to have a new experience or have a new understanding. And I think that that's really important. And for me, it's just brought me back to this real awe of, wow, this is not how it always used to be.
Hmm.
Death used to just be a part of life, and we would die in our homes, and we would, it was very much a part of life. Um, and just recognizing now, wow, just recently in human history have we made birth and death um, this sort of industrialized, it's got to happen in a hospital where no one can see it. It
Hmm.
used to be all home births and home deaths.
Hmm.
It was just something that happened. So there wasn't this weird, oh, it's so uncomfortable. I got to get outside of my comfort zone. It just was part of the cycle. So, um, yeah, I'm not sure how accurately that answered your question, but
I'm going to tell you what I'm taking. I love it. No, it did. I think for the longest, for what feels like the most recent time, I should say, it's comfort, and
Mhm.
outside is fear. So
Yeah,
stay in comfort to not feel fear.
yeah,
But what I'm hearing from you, and we don't have to say should, or I would say
right,
should,
right, right.
we could, instead of comfort, what's out here could be curiosity. And it's all about that mindset we have towards it. If it's fear, I'm going to stay in comfort zone.
Yeah,
But if it's like, I wonder what I can learn, and like you said, it it's not going to kill you to learn more about it, right?
yeah,
It is going to feel uncomfortable at first, going to feel different, but
yeah.
curiosity slowly trumps that. Why do you feel? And maybe we're on the same path, right? But it's like I still want to ask the question: why do you feel people don't get out? Like ego aside, right? I don't
Yeah,
want to feel like you're high and mighty. I just want your honest answer here. Why
yeah.
do you think most people don't get outside their comfort zones, whether it's about death or about their passion?
Yeah, I think it's like an old wiring, right? Of just like trying to stay alive and be,
Hmm.
as a human. Like we don't want to get eaten by big animals. We don't want to get killed. We don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to be left out of the pack. Those are all survival tactics. So I think it's really about survival. And if we can like look and understand that, like, oh, my fear is coming from, I want to survive, then we can go, okay, well, let me stretch just a little bit. I don't need to go skydiving. I don't need to go become a funeral director. I don't need to, but I could just stretch a little bit and watch a documentary, or
Hmm.
just go, buy this open house. And, so it's just, I think when we're talking about comfort zone, it's about baby steps, right? How can I just baby step stretch out of my comfort zone? And for me, there's like the simple definition of trauma, right? Is too much, too fast, too soon. And if we've had like we have too much coming at us, it's too much for our system, right?
Yeah.
To jump too far out of our comfort zone. So can we really bolster ourselves up? I think about like the other day, I just had one of those just stay at home all day kind of days. Sometimes if I give myself that really like come all the way into the fetal position, just hang out in the hammock under the bed, just giving yourself that time to be completely in your comfort zone,
Hmm.
then that becomes uncomfortable. You're like, okay, I gotta I gotta get
Yeah.
out a little bit. So, everything is like a breath. I
Hmm.
work a lot with breath, so it's like we have that full inhale, and then we get so full, we got to come back
Hmm.
to the exhale. So I think if we can think of comfort zone in terms of breathing, right? There's gonna be a natural like we're all the way in, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to expand.
Yeah, it's almost like what I hear from you. It's like comfort zone is good, but to
Yeah.
stay there is where it can be detrimental.
Yes.
And uncomfort is great, but to stay there it could be detrimental. And to
Yeah.
oscillate, the
Yeah.
biggest thing that I'm taking from it is it's like curiosity mixed with patience, right? I think a lot of people want to rush through a process like this. They don't give themselves the time. And
Yeah.
then the other thing is they're not willing to be curious with it. So I'm gonna kind of tell everything that I learned in just a second. But last thing, because you already gave me what you would tell someone.
Yeah.
How do people find you? I know you have a podcast. Do you work
Yep.
with anyone that's going through grief as well? Like, what else do you do? How do people find you?
Absolutely. So I work one-on-one with a small number of people.
Okay.
So I have, limited time in my in my week, but I do have private clients. So if somebody needs work, I like to work seasonally,
Mm-hmm.
so I find that a year is really helpful, but that's like too far out to look. So I like to work 3 months at a time. We can get
Mm-hmm.
through a whole cycle of something in 3 months. So I do work privately with some people. I have two ways that people can access me that are free
Mm-hmm.
and open to the public. One is the podcast, Walk Through Grief with Grace. And you can find that on Apple and Spotify and all the places you listen to podcasts. The other is, if you're a Facebook user, I have a private group in Facebook called Grief and Grace.
Hmm.
Not the business page, but the group.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a place where you can connect with people and make posts and honor folks and,
Amazing.
learn some tools and get connected. So the Grief and Grace group is a resource I created during the pandemic for folks. And then I have a membership that I'm just starting right now called the Grace Collective, where folks, who are interested in, more intimate community and also working through moving through whatever phase of transition and loss or celebration they're in, through community holding them, through movement and through creativity. It's really a creativity membership, because what I notice is that energy that we talk about that gets stuck, once we start moving that, then you have this extra life force energy to do something with. And what I've noticed across the board with all the clients I've worked with over the years is they have this new life force. And it's not about getting back to who we once were. Like, how do I get back to feeling like myself again? You're never going to be that self again. We're never the same. We're always evolving. So it's, how do I take the new energy that's freed up and create something with it? And there's so much healing that happens when we create. Yeah.
You had me at create and creativity.
Yeah.
That's my deep desire.
Yeah.
Jenn, thank you so much for today's podcast. I always learn something new. So such a fun, peaceful, relaxing conversation. And I was wired high coming into it. And we're talking about something that society could say is wired high. But I learned so much. I took some notes. Just to recap, everyone, we talked about being a thought leader is being someone that thinks outside of the box, not being afraid to be a trailblazer. Seeing cancer as a journey and not a battle was a big one for me early on, and being able to weave that into our life if we know anyone that's potentially going through it. The importance of giving yourself time with these stages of grief, right? Moving through change, literally moving through change, getting your body moving however you do it. The importance there. We cannot control time, but we can control our actions within the time. The power of starting to do some of this work now so you can be there and show up for yourself, your family, and your friends. And sometimes it is just the simple things. And most importantly, make curiosity trump comfort. Be curious, get uncomfortable, and you can always come back to the comfort zone. It was such a cool podcast. Jenn Cormier, thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, to everybody else.
Thank you, Dylan.
Not a problem.